First, let me say thank you to you for delivering it, to the secretary, and to all the others who you mentioned. This was a beautiful, perhaps overstated, but very nice introduction. And if I were a truly rational man with a capital R and a capital M, I would say thank you very much and sit down, because you can't get better than what you had to say. But since you all came, and I know some of you came from far, let's get started. The topic for tonight that I thought I'd talk about was a good longevity experience addressing the global retirement funding crisis. And although I will make specific comments about Mexico in terms of my context, I want to remind all of us that everywhere in the world is having a crisis, or fearing that they will have a crisis in retirement. This is not something in Mexico or in the US or wherever. It's everywhere. Even in the Middle East, in the richest countries in the Middle East, where you couldn't imagine they would be worried about it, they are. So I just wanted to say this whole discussion tonight is a global discussion, not specifically to Mexico, but I promise you I will have some specifics for you. All right, well, let's get started. You ready? Yes. Good. All right, so now I just have to make that clear. Now, before you start to talk about all the things you want to do and how to optimize and all that, you first have to decide, what are you trying to do? What is the retirement system's objective? Because if you don't know what your objective is or your goal is, how could you possibly optimize? You don't know where you're going or want to go. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to use for my definition. I'm saying, of course, the pension system, at least as a goal, not always achieved, is to have a good retirement for people. Seems pretty reasonable. But I'm going to define what I'm going to use for a good retirement, and so that's the context with which you should relate everything I have to say. Because if you don't know what the objective is, pretty hard. So I consider a good retirement as if when you reach retirement, you're ending your work years, whatever standard of living you've become accustomed to, that you could keep it for the rest of your life. Now, we'd all like more, of course, but I can tell you, I'm looking at the group, this is a young group, everybody's a young group. But the point is, I can tell you, when you get there, you really don't want to lower your standard of living. You've gotten used to how you live. So let me move on here and say, this is what I'm going to use. And why this is important is because if you accept it, two things. One, it's the standard of living when you retire, at the end of your work life, not the average of your standard of living throughout your work life or some others. So we're going to have to accomplish, how do we try to get you the standard of living that you're living in? Some of you, 20, 30, 40, I looked around the room and I think there may even be 50 years from now. That's a long time, okay? How can we try to make that assured? So moving on, that's the first thing. Second thing is, how do you measure standard of living? I come here to Mexico City, I say a lovely city. What if I decided I might want to come here and live here? And I'd look around and I'd see someone and I say, I like the way that person is living here in Mexico City. And then I ask the magic question, what would it take for me to be able to live like that person here in Mexico City? Well, I think I can assure you, you would not tell me you need so many millions of whatever in the bank or in your investments. You'd say to me, you have to be earning about this amount to live in this style. It's always the case that standard of living is defined by income, not by wealth. Okay? And that's very important to remember, because this is the goal. And this is an income goal. It is not a wealth goal. And we recognize that in standard pension systems, people don't say, what is your guaranteed pension worth? They just say, here's what you're going to get paid. Here's what we're promising you, stream of income. But in areas, including the others, because you have a defined contribution system, it's not quite the same, but you understand, I know what it is. They tend to show you what your account's worth. And that's really not the right number. Well, let me move on, at least I've said this. So the goal is retirement income. Now the next point I'll make before going on is a reality check. If you're doing a reasonable job, you haven't, if you're doing everything wrong, then you have to fix it. But if you're doing a pretty good job, there are really only 4 ways to improve your chances to getting to a good retirement. Save more, that means consume less. Work longer before retiring. You don't have to fund as long a retirement, you save more, and so forth. That means you have to carry the bricks longer. So, the third one is take more investment risk. Well, that seems kind of nice because you really don't have to do anything. You just change what you're invested in. But risk is real, whether you have a long run or a short run or a medium run. Even the longest run, risk does not go away. And so if you choose to take risk, which many people are willing to take some take a lot, you always have to have what you call plan B. What would you do or how would you handle if risk is actually realized? So those are the 3. There's the 4th one, which is whatever amount you have accumulated, all the assets you have when you reach retirement, whatever amount it is, you want to make sure you get the most retirement benefits you can out of those assets for the same risk. If you change the risk, then you change things, okay? So those are really the only 4 ways, and that's the reality check. If you can't point to one of those 4, be suspicious as to whether they can deliver it. But let's move on. Now, I want to take, because I want to move on, I want to talk to you about a general overview I have for a retirement system. I have 6 feasible components. I view it as an integrated framework. However, the 6 don't all have to be put in at the same time. It doesn't have to be massive at one time. And let me just tell you too, what we call sometimes in the jargon, Pillar 1, that's a Social Security system, a defined benefit, a guaranteed pension, okay? What I have to say about that is, it's very important to ensure that people, particularly younger people who are not going to get to their retirement for a long time, that they trust that that system, whatever amount is there, it may be very little or whatever, they trust it will be there. If they lose that trust, you'll have a very unfortunate circumstance. You'll be spending the resources, but your people, especially the young people, won't factor it in. So that's the number 1 on my mind. Of course, you want to do everything else right. Pillar 2, which I call defined contribution, which is not quite the same as the I4, but the key is with the I4, you're taking the risk. You're making some decisions as to what to invest in. And then, of course, you have professional management. And that's the fastest growing in the world. Throughout the world, systems are all moving in the direction of people taking greater responsibility for their own retirement. And I don't say it's good or bad, it's just a fact. And so this is very important, and I don't want to go through all of this, I'll take too much of my precious time with you, but I do want to say, as a concept, make it as easy as having a pension, which means you don't really have to know anything other than what you already know. And you don't have to keep making lots of complex decisions, all right? If you want to, that's fine. Or if you have the resources to hire someone to do it for you, that's fine. But a key design is to make it so that it works well without people having to be very sophisticated at all. The third one, called Pillar 3, comes from the idea that if you're going to have a retirement system for a country, it should be for all the people in the country, not just some. Seems reasonable. And what I have in mind, not here in Mexico particularly, although as we'll see you have a substantial number, is the large informal sector. And when I'm using the term the informal sector here, is I'm assuming in the simplicity, they don't have access to any pensions. Okay, now that's not precisely correct, but it's very close in many cases. So what do you do with people who are, that even though they don't have any pensions, they still have to plan for retirement like everybody else? So that means basically they're going to be responsible for saving all of what they need for their retirement. And that seemed like an important group when you look around the world. Okay, so that's the third piece that I have. Now I move to the next one. And as I already said in a different context, be sure that you get the maximum benefits you can from what you have. In other words, get the most income in retirement for people that you can. And that's going to be a very good way. I'm going to talk more about that, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. I'm going to talk about number 3, the one with the informality of economy, and number 4, so I won't go any further. The 5th one I wanted to mention is a thought. Remember I mentioned the 4 ways to improve your chances for a good retirement. One of them was work longer. Okay, now not everybody wants to, but it's a choice. And reality is that that choice can't be relied on often. A lot of people don't work longer because they're not a lot. No one wants to hire them. Or, you know, I mean, you know what I mean? In other words, some people retire because they are not able to continue in another job. So the idea here is take advantage of this enormous resource, particularly as people are living longer. You know, some of the people in the audience here may live well over 100. Okay, and so that's a resource that we should use. At the same time, give people a reliable way to say, if I want to work, okay, am I echoing? Yeah. Is this echoing to you, or is it just me? Okay, as long as it's not echoing to you, that's fine. Anyway, so give people a choice that if they want to work longer, that they can reliably do so, assuming they have the physical and other possibilities. Because then they can build it into their plan. It's like they're building up a retirement in their accumulations. You see what I mean? And we also know, I'm not going to go any further in this, but I wanted to point out that it's not necessarily the best for people's health who have worked for decades and they wake up one day and they're not working. So it's also a way to phase into it. But the key is it's choice, not required. Okay? And how do we use that to improve the output of the GDP and all those things for our economy? We pick kinds of jobs for which seniors actually have a competitive and comparative advantage. Maybe they're less frazzled, or, you know, and so they might be very good looking after little children. They can't run around after big people because there's some limits, but you can see that might be something. Plus, many of them have already been parents, so they get a second shot at doing it right. I don't know how many parents there are said, gee, if I was doing it over, I'd do a better job. What's another one? You know, planting flowers, doing other things. The key is that these are real jobs. They're not make work just a way to give people money. But they really are jobs that are for them, where they can do better. And remember, they are not trying to build a career the way people in an earlier stage are. And so you want to have jobs that don't have to spend years training and all that. So I won't belabor this, but I think it's really important, and I think it's well doable. Everything I talk about tonight, not all of it's being done, but all of it is very doable. Okay, this is not pie in the sky, even some of the AI, you know, someday we'll do this. This is everything I taught you tonight is doable. The last one I mentioned is just consider, if you haven't already, I don't know the system well enough here in Mexico, to restructure a bit the retirement system so that it has a somewhat broader life cycle coverage. You know, most of us like to live, you know, they say the life cycle, but you don't want to live on the minimum while you're working so you can dine on crystal when you retire. And I've already indicated to you, I don't think you're going to like it very much if you've been dining on crystal and have to live at the minimum. There's a tendency to balance it out. Now, the only reason I mention that is, if during your work life you have a shock, something unfortunate bad to you, your job, you can't earn as much, whatever, okay? Now, then it makes no sense to keep the same level for your retirement goal that you had before, because you're going to take all the hit now. What you do is you balance it up. So you should bring down your goal for retirement to balance it out where you are now. So this is what I have in mind here. Now, as a practical matter, it has another feature. That means the money going into savings for retirement, especially at pensions, can be used for those important things that happen in a very sensible way. And I think that will encourage participation. Because if the people say, oh, gee, I put this money in a retirement account, what if I need it? Not because I want to do something nice, it's because I have that. Okay, so those are the 6, and I won't belabor it because I won't have time, but I think you can put all of these in, and I think they fit in very well as a structured plan. And like many things I'm going to talk about, it doesn't have to be all done at once, but it's very important to build a long-term plan of what you want to build into the retirement system, so that what you build now fits in with the plan of where you want to be. And so that's the thing. So now let me move forward. I'm now going to go into some very specifics. Number 4, maximizing the amount that you have at retirement. That was one of the objectives. For most people, the way I look at it, there are 2 things that really can move the needle, and I'll show you numbers, on improving retirement broadly. There are many individual cases, but this is broadly. And one of them is an annuity. I don't know how many, everybody here probably knows what an annuity is. It's like a pension, but you buy it from a company or insurance company or something, in which you give them money, they pay you every month for as long as you live. And I would underscore what that means, for as long as you need money. You don't need money later on. So for as long as you need money, even if you live to 120 as all the good books wishes, you'll be always getting a payment. And that's one of the benefits of pensions. They're very similar. But in return, what you say is, when I don't need money anymore, you can keep what I gave you. Because of that feature, they will pay you more, whoever issues this annuity, they'll pay you more for the rest of your life, or as long as you need money, in return for getting the money when you don't need it. And some people say, well, what happens to me is something I get hit by a truck. And the point is, you don't need money after that. So I just think it's a very sensible thing. Now, unfortunately, they don't always design them well. And it's important, too, when you're looking at proposals, to differentiate between a good product poorly done and just a poor product. If it's a poor product, a good product poorly done, you can fix it by doing it right. If it's just a poor product, you throw it away. But it's very important to distinguish that. And by the way, with annuities, and the other, which I'm now going to mention, is the reverse mortgage. I know you have some of that here already. I hate that name. It's a terrible. The best one I know for name for it is in Korea. They call it a home pension. But by any other name, the key feature of what I'll call the reverse mortgage, that's what I wrote up here, even though I hate the name, okay? The key feature is, different from any other loan you take or any other mortgage, is as long as you live in the house, you make no payments, no interest payments, and no principal payments, and you can't be forced to do so. That's a contract. Now think about this. you're retiring. You're not going to be moving around to new jobs the way you do it earlier in your life. You pick the place you think you want to be. Many people are likely thinking, this is where I want to stay for as long as I'm around. So this is the house you want to live in. What this says is, you can take out a mortgage, meaning they give you cash or the equivalent, just like a mortgage when you buy a house or something. But the big difference is, you don't have to worry that something comes up, you can't pay the mortgage money, you can't pay the monthly payment, the house gets seized. You see, so in effect, if you stay in the house for the rest of your life, you'll never pay for it. Now, the house is there as collateral and so forth, but the key is that it's not risky for you in that sense. Now, there are some risks, as always, in special cases, but fundamentally, that's what's different about this than borrowing money in a bank, or something like that, okay? And, that this is, the other thing is that they almost always have in it that it's non-recourse. Now, what does that mean? That means whoever gives you this loan, the only asset backing this loan is the house. So if you leave other things, or they can't come and take anything else. So those are the two key features, and I can't spend any more time explaining to you why it is. I think you could probably see that's a nice, very big difference from borrowing on your house when you have to make a monthly payment if you have a problem. So that's what I like about it, and that's why I think this is a choice. It makes sense. Now, let me show you we're using US numbers, and these will change with the numbers, but it'll make the point. How big an impact? What I did is look at the 50th percentile of US income, about $50,000 a year, and I gave a hypothetical, what's the goal? 36,000 a year, 72% replacement. You're no longer saving other things, so you don't necessarily need what you've been, the whole 50 you've been living on. But these are, you can make them any numbers you want. But that's the number I use here. So the goal is $36,000. All right. Now, I'm assuming in there would be the outdoor here, but in the DC plants, let's say in the US, you would have 165,000 assets and a $300,000 house. Okay? That sounds like a high number, but unfortunately, it doesn't buy a lot in the United States. But this is 50th percentile. Okay? Now, suppose, and we have Social Security, as I'm sure you're aware. So let me show you on line A, if somebody takes their Social Security and then takes their money out of their DC account and puts it in bonds to be safe. Okay, so they're going to get the interest on it. Well, when you put the numbers in here, I don't know what I point to here to get a pointer. Ah, there it is. You get $21,000 a year, or 60% of the goal. If instead of putting it in a bond in these numbers, you buy an annuity, again, no matter how long you live, you'll never run out of money from this. They never stop paying until you don't need money, okay? It goes from, by putting the annuity in, it goes from 60% to 77%. You see, the annuity's helped. It isn't for free. You're giving up the money when you don't need it, but it's a way that everybody can kind of get there. The exact numbers are going to change with prices, but this is the point. Now, reverse mortgage, and I'm using the numbers that the US government puts on what you could do for a reverse mortgage. This 54% is what the maximum you can do. When you take that amount, and if you take that amount, that means you get, this person gets this $162,000 mortgage. Say, I'm sorry, I'm blocking your view. It's okay. You take the $162,000, which is that, and you buy an annuity. That will bring your income up there, and guess what? You're at 100% of your goal. And I've just broke it down. Social Security, annuity, reverse mortgage. Now, don't write down these numbers because they're going to change. The point I'm trying to make to you is these are two vehicles that can really move the needle. They're not kind of things, very specialized or very small things. And they're quite universal. And so that's why I want to call it to your attention. All right? Now, with that, let me move. I promised you I'd say something about Mexico. Okay? And I just use numbers here, but you know them already. Mexico looks to me like, improving retirement experience with a well-designed, and I had it on a slide, and I'm saying it again. A lot of reverse mortgages, the way they're done now, are costly and not well done. But you could design them well. It's pretty easy. I mean, it's a doable thing. And you could have competitors who come in and say, we're going to build a well-designed feature. So this is really doable. But I'm warning you, I don't know how the state of the reverse mortgage offerings here, but maybe they're not so great, maybe they're very expensive. But there's no reason they have to be. They're just not being done well. And this should be a project, and I want to convince you it's worth looking to. So what am I showing you here? You have 69% home ownership. That means a good fraction of your population has a house and will have a house. Now, it may be very modest, but it's a house. And this isn't some, sliver of the population, okay? And so this means that if you had a really good reverse mortgage, well-designed, etc., a good part of the population who is saving now, most personal saving, by the way, not in your pension fund, but personal saving, is people buy a house. In fact, that's usually the only real personal saving they do. Okay? So you don't have to change behavior. They're already saving by buying the house. They want it, appears, it's common in the industry. A significant portion of millennials I did read is going to do it. And look at the size. I mean, I'm just giving you numbers. You know them better than I. But, the average house in Mexican house is, 1.7 million pesos. And here in Mexico City, it's averaging almost 4 million. Now, if you're trying to buy a house, that's probably a little uncomfortable. But if you look at it the other way, this is a big number. So it's not just that they have a house, but that house is worth a lot, and that's why you get that kick I showed you. Remember the $300,000 US house? Okay? You see how much of a kick you got? And that's using actual US numbers, and the US system is not that efficient. There's a lot of improvement you can make. So that's the point I want to make, and that's what partly it's excited me about this coming here. Because you have a country that by choice is very house buying. Some countries, even very wealthy ones like Germany, like 40% of the population rents. I mean, only owns a house. All right, so that's number 4. Number 4. Now I'm going to go back to number 3. Remember I talked about the informal sector? Okay? Well, I'm going to show you an innovation. It's real. It's ongoing at the moment. So this is live. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I'm hopeful. I think so. But it's for real. It's not something that someone did on a napkin in a restaurant and said, someday we can do this. So this is for the informal sector, but I'll give you a little hint. That's where we started. That was the motivation. What can we do for this segment of every country's population? We have a gig economy in the United States, for example, for which this transformation is going on in a different way. So what I wanted to say to you is we're going to design what we call a retirement security bond, RSB. And it's a global design to work anywhere that has a government bond market. And it's to address the time with a focus, at least initially, on the informal sector. What I wanted to tell you is the hint. We'll see at the end, it works for everybody. So if you don't have an informal sector, if you have another solution for the informal sector, it's still a good idea, I think. So you'll see that. All right? And I also show, not planned, but when we finish designing it, it will facilitate infrastructure development. And it may reduce government bond cost and risk. So it's something for everybody is what I'm trying to say. And that's usually a case where you have a chance of having a success, because everybody can get something out of it rather than one particular group. So let me show you how it works, the design. First of all, well, I just quickly said, again, you know this. In terms of Mexico, how important is the informal sector? I don't really need to tell you, but I'm telling you, I found out how much. And, you know, it's a quarter of GDP. And these are so much. By the way, these slides, if people want them, I'll make them available to you. So you don't have to take pictures, listen, and get interested. Contact whoever's running this thing. We'll work out something, okay? So that's clear. So the point here is the informal sector is important to this country. It isn't just you want to do nice things to help people out who are in, let's say, not always the best place, but it's important to your economy. This matters for everyone. So at least this, I hope, gets your attention. Okay? Now let's talk about what is a retirement security bond. Okay? Number one, it's a government bond. In the United States, it would be a U.S. full faith and credit treasury. It is the highest rated bond in the country. That's what I want it to be. You understand? It's not an agency bond. It's not an income bond, you know, contingent on some project. It's the full faith and credit of the country. Meaning that if you don't pay on it, you're going to put the country's entire debt system in bankruptcy. That's a pretty big penalty. Right? And it's important that you have it this way for the design. Everything I show you, I'm going to show you the pieces, because a lot of people design things on the back of a paper and they say, yeah, you know, that isn't how it works. It's not something, it's the detail and how it's designed is the difference between having a chance to succeed and almost sure failure. All right, so it's a government bond, and it's going to be, since we're trying to deal with people who don't have pensions, we're going to call it a pension bond. It has two features that make it different than the government bonds that you know about. One is the payout pattern, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the other is that it's indexed to it. It's not in pesos or dollars. It's indexed to something, and I'm going to show you what it is. Those are the really only two differences. Otherwise, think of it as just something issued by the Treasury, government bond. All right? Now, what are the payouts indexed to? You're used to having indexed to inflation. You have a whole bond series on that. That's good, but it's not good enough. Why? If you buy, and I'm looking at this, the younger of the young group out here, okay, particularly, if you buy an index bond today, and let's not worry about your consumption's a little different than the index. You know, I'm going to act like it's going to get you to pretty close to something. It's going to protect you pretty well. If you buy a bond today and you lock in, protect yourself from inflation, what have you done? You've locked in your standard of living today. Because if your standard of living changes, that bond's not going to give you any more. Let's say there's zero inflation, you're just going to get the promised rate. Is it beating back now? I don't know. Is that? I don't know why that's doing that.
It's okay. Get the space.
It's all right. Well, anything else I can do to interrupt the talk for myself? But you know, so the point is, if you think about when you're buying it, what are you going to get if you're putting your money in over your work life, and you put it in indexing for inflation? You're going to get the standard of living you had when you were 25 or 30, when you were 40, when you were 50. It's going to be an average, and that's not our goal. Our goal is that you can continue to live the way you're living, not some hypothetical average. Okay, students in particular probably don't want to live in the standard of living that they live as students. But in any case, but if I do it to aggregate per capita consumption, what am I doing? I'm capturing both inflation and the right inflation, not the producer price index, but related to consumption. And which index is not important, just make a decent one, okay? Well, what else am I giving you? Standard of living. This consumption per capita goes up not just because of inflation, but it goes up because things have gotten better. You have a higher standard of living than you did, and I like to think in the long run that's what we hope for, and that's what's generally happened. In general, most of the countries, not all, are in a much better place today than they were. Not saying that it's a great place, but it's better. Okay? So you get, now if you have it indexed to consumption, it doesn't matter when you buy the bond, because in the end you're going to be covered for all the increases in standard of living as well as inflation. So you're going to get to the goal, the target of the goal. This feature does it. So those are the two things. Now, how is it going to be sold? Well, first let me show the payout. Remember I said it has to look like a pension? On the left side is the graph or the picture of payments to buy an RSP. As you see, there's a payment out when you buy the bond, like any bond, at the start. I'm taking someone who's planning to retire in 2058, or 32 years old or something like that. And so that's a good while from here. And when you go through it, you see there are no payments on this bond at all. No coupons, nothing. Until when? Until 2058. And then in 2058, you get a stream of payments for 25 years, 20 years. We'll talk about that, but you see what I mean? So do you understand the payment pattern? Does that look like anything you know? Yes, it's a pension. You put your money in a pension, do you get anything from it? Not until you retire, right? I mean, they don't send you any money. So that's what I meant by it's like a pension bond. So bond traders would look at this and say, I wouldn't buy that. And you know what my answer to them is? I'm not trying to sell it to you. I'm trying to sell it to people who want something like a pension, something that will give them for retirement. And this looks just like it. So it may look strange to bond people, but to the rest of the world, that looks like a pension. And remember, it's backed by full faith and credit. It's stronger credit than any pension. Okay? So it's also, that's important because it's a long time for people when they're young. And you want them to believe that when they own this, they own it. But remember, it's a bond. Now, some people say to me, look, Professor, that's a nice idea, but in the real world, we have a lot of bonds, you know, blinkers and so forth, 30-year bonds in some cases in my country. That's good enough. And as someone who wrote papers about how to dynamically manage bonds to replicate any bond that's out there, even if there are no such bonds in existence, you know about those systems, right? I see a smile. Okay? So I know how to do that, and professionals can do it for some things. It's clunky, and I promise you, you won't be able to do it. Not because you're not smart enough, it's just you have to spend a lot of time and a lot of resources, and you're a high-cost producer of this, okay? But what I really want to show you how bad it is for the design. What does the typical bond do? It pays you interest payment every 6 months, 2 payments a year. It's typical. So if I get a 30-year bond, let's say it's a linker, so it's protected from inflation, okay? How many payments do I get till I get to the end of that bond? Well, every 6 months, I'm getting a little payment here. And, you know, when you're first starting out, how much do you have in bonds? And you're starting to say, not very much. And so the interest payment's pretty small. But you get it every 6 months, right? You see them in the graph? What does that mean? Forget about fees or anything. That means every 6 months you get some money, a small amount, and you gotta do something with it. My guess is that most people will say it's too much trouble and they'll spend it. In which case you've done a lot to defeat the purpose. So what do you then happen? Notice over here, if it's a 30-year bond for our person, okay, the balloon payment, you know, you get the principal back with a normal bond, here is many years before you actually retire. So now you're going to get this big chunk of money 6 or 7 years before you retire, 30 years from now. Nobody knows what interest rates are going to be 30 years from now. No one does. So you're taking a rather big risk. What, you know, if interest rates are high, you say, yahoo, I'm going to make it big. What happens if interest rates have been like they've been around the globe up until very recently, last few years? Okay. $1 million in a U.S. 10-year treasury, the most liquid bond in the world, 5 years ago earned 60 basis points. Putting that in common sense, $6,000 a year. How many millions do you need to get to 50,000 income? You see what I'm saying? Now, it's going up again, but you don't know. It's very risky. So you have huge reinvestment risk. You have 61 transactions to get once you're here, at least, and then you're going to have to get into a whole bunch more. On the other hand, how many transactions do you have here if he actually or she actually retires in 2058? One. You bought the bond. You don't do anything because there's nothing to do here. And when you get here, you say, what do I want? I want a stream of income, like a pension. That's what the bond gives you. I'll say a footnote because I'm looking at the time and you're being very having sit here or so forth. But you might say to yourself, well, what about if they want longevity protection? You know what I mean, buying an annuity so they don't run out of money. In the design, I can't go into it, this is a little teaser for you. We picked the number of payments on this RSP to match the life expectancy of, let's say, a 65-year-old retiring, plus a little more, or somewhat more, not changing the amount that you get, but changing the number of payments on the RSP. So if the life expectancy is 65 or 25, we would have 27 payments. What are those 2 payments for? To pay the insurance company for the real costs of doing this. This isn't cost-free. But it's a perfect hedge for the insurance company, because what the insurance company can do that none of us can, they can diversify the life risk. They're going to get very close to the expected value for sure. That's why insurance companies work, and why they're important for that, okay? So we can handle that, even though it's a bond. And it's bond, and what's another feature? Because it's a bond, for any reason, if they need money, they can sell it. That's a nice feature. You have to be careful, but it's a nice feature because then they know if they need their money. They're very worried. I'm going to tie my money into this thing for 30 or 40 years and I don't know what I might need, especially for younger people. So it's a way of encouraging and giving flexibility. So that's on the prices. Now, what do you have to know to make a decision here? You know, I'm somebody with a 6th grade formal education, but I'm an adult who looks after myself. I'm not dumb. I just don't have a big formal education. But I can take care of myself. What do they have to know if they want to buy this bond? Well, the beauty is, let's say, you know, the bond pays, let's say, $10 a year per bond, or 10, you can make up the number. But let's just say 10 years of bond. You know that for each bond you have, you're going to get $10 a year starting, let's say, in 2058. So if you have 100 bonds, you're going to get 1,000, right? And then if you have 5,000 bonds, you're going to get 50,000. You know what you're going to get. And that's what you care about, not how much it's worth, because you bought this for the income in retirement, like a pension. You don't ask, what is my pension worth? Once you have it, you don't say what annuity is worth. You say, it pays me so much a year for the rest of my life. You see what I mean? That's what's important. It's not the measure that counts. And so what happens here is that it's really simple for them to decide. Remember the shoe store example, where they walk in and they pick size shoes matching, you know, when you go in the store, you only buy shoes that are a size that you wear. When you go into the treasury to buy an RSP, you buy the year when you're planning to retire. You don't buy some other year. Okay, so 2058 is an example. And then what do? You have that bond, you get it. You know immediately how many bonds you have to get to a good retirement. That's a goal. You may not get there. How do I decide that? How am I living now? If I'm living now on 50,000, or whatever number you put in, that's the number you're going to be your goal. Why? Because we've already protected you against inflation and against standard of living. So what you need for your retirement, given the goal we agreed to, or at least you sort of agreed to, you didn't say no. Given the goal, you know exactly how much you have as your goal. It's how you're living now. You see, you don't have to do any forecasting of interest rates, of inflation rates, of standard of living, because it's all covered. So people know how they're living now. They have a budget, they make a decision. I've got money, wherever it came from. Do I buy tomatoes? Do I fix the house? Or do I buy an RSP? And they can figure that out because they understand how they're living now, so they can do the calculation in their head. They don't need to know anything more. And that's a critical part of doing this, as well as protecting them against that risk. And so, for example, if their goal is 50,000, then they know 5,000 bonds at 10 a year is their goal. What happens 15 years from 20 years from now? They say, how am I doing? They see they have 3,000 bonds. And remember, they're always buying the same bond. They buy it at different times, but it's always a 2058. So you don't have a portfolio of bonds. You have one bond, a 2058, or what year, 2040, whenever you're retiring, one bond, all with the same payments, all with the same features. So you look at one thing. It's just like looking at your pension now, in terms of that. And you can say, let's say I had 3,000 bonds. What do they know immediately? Without anybody helping them, they know they have 30,000 a year in retirement, all taken care of for standard of living and everything. So it's the style that they want to live in, can live in, are living in. All right? And then they can do what? This is what I wanted to show you. I know it's taking some time, I'm running short, but I want to get to this with you. You might say, yeah, my goal was 50,000, you know how we got there. This was how you were living. But then you say, you know, I'm not going to be paying for my children when I'm retired. I'll get them an education, but I'm not going to be responsible for taking care of them. I am now. So that's one expense will be away. What's another one? You love bird watching. That's what his passion is. He watches bird watching because that's what excites him. But it turns out bird watching is not a terribly expensive thing to do. You know, you get binoculars and a few other things, and you do it. So he thinks about it and says, you know, maybe I don't need 50,000 a year. Maybe I only need 30 or 35. On the other hand, you look at this and say, I'm living on 50,000, 30,000, I'm going to cut my way of living, 40%? No way. You know you need to save more. How much more? You know. Same situation, two different conclusions. And I'm trying to get you to see design to make things based on what people already know and are able to figure out for themselves the important stuff. And they can answer that question individually, not being told that you're on some kind of avatar, which you are not. Okay? And that's why I'm emphasizing this. This is a way to do this, and we do this in other areas, so let me move on. Now I want to finish up with just a couple of things. I promised you at the beginning, I told you what it was for. This is for the informal sector. People who have to save everything on their own. Now you can see why I want to make it really simple and easy to do. Who else can use it? That's the first one. How about if you have a pension fund, but it doesn't let it pay you enough for what you want for a good retirement? Then you're going to have to save on your own, right? Now you look like the informal sector, incrementally. You got a pension, but it's not enough. So you can buy RSPs. Third category, in my country we have VC plans. You're responsible. Now you're responsible here because you make choices about which fund. But with us, it's crazy. I mean, it's, you know, there's a zillion different products and you have to make a lot of decisions. And now, since you're at risk, you have to make the decisions. If the decision is to hire someone or the decision is to follow some, you know, something that's recommended, that's your choice. But you have to make decisions. So if you had an RSP available to you in your VC plans, if you chose to want the safe answer, because this you agree is safe, it's full faith and credit, it's protected against the two important things, okay? Now, last I say is this is that that's another group, what to invest in when I have to take the responsibility for it, okay? It's very like the first, second one. And then those who can afford to have advisors, you know, relatively wealthy people, okay? Advisors are going to love this because they can tailor using these bonds to take care of second cousins' incomes, or, you know, you can use your imagination. Advisors will love these. I know, because they're going to be able to say, we'll tailor it exactly to everything you want. Now, it's a much more complex custom. You'll see there's a demand there. And then, what else do you have? Institutional investors. Now, fourth, they're an institution. Insurance companies, pension funds, okay? They're going to love this because you could take a pension, you could take the actual people in your pension, their age and how much you owe them, and you could tailor these bonds to match that, so you have a much less, you know, tracking error is called, where your bonds don't do what they're supposed to do but what you have to pay people. And therefore, you have to put a reserve or a cushion in. If you can get it perfectly matched, you can get rid of reserves. Insurance companies can either take more risk without changing that they're covering the reserves, and pension funds too, or people that don't have to put as much in. Okay? So all of these are channels that will want this and can use it. So if the informal sector is not important in anything, everybody will use this. And I'm not going to have any trouble selling these to institutions. I feel very confident. I wouldn't pay people a lot because it matches up to what they need, and they're always looking for it. So that's who will use it. Now, finally, and then we'll quit. Almost quit. Technically twice. Why did we pick governance to be the issuer? Why do we have banks issue it or somebody else? Well, that's not because I automatically just say government's a good idea or a bad idea. Number one, it is the highest rated, lowest credit risk that you can get in any country. You can't insure yourself against what your government does. If you're kidding yourself. I'm not talking about people, you know, billionaires who have airplanes and have money all over the world. That's fine. I'm not worried about helping them. That'd be fine. But for the rest of us, including me and my country, I live in my country. They have control. They can do whatever they want with me, and that's not because they're bad. It's because that's what governments do. We need them in crises. We need them for things. And so, what I'm saying to you is that, you know, this gives you the highest credit rating I know how to give. And I won't promise people something that's safe that's not really safe. That's the worst thing you can do. I always say to people, what's worse than being uninsured? Thinking you're insured when you're not. Because then you don't know that when trouble's coming, you better do something. Because you think you don't have the problem. So that's number one. Two, if it's going to be one of the pillars, this is not a replacement. Let me be absolutely clear. This is not a replacement for Social Security or its equivalent. It's not a replacement for, in this country, the armed force system. Where do? They take risk for you. In other words, this is not a replacement asset. It's the risk-free asset. And so it's a way that the armed force can actually give you better risk-free and therefore take more risk prudently. So I want to be very, very clear. This is not a substitute or replacement for, it's an augmentation. So this is not taking anything away to do this. So everything I've talked about, think of this as basically a risk-free asset, except that you do get standard of living protection and inflation. But that's risk-free. That's not taking risks like buying stocks or properties or things like that, which happens in the portfolio. So this is not something that's going to be a challenge to the private sector of investing. In fact, I think it'll enhance it. And it's not something that's going to try to challenge or take away Social Security. All right. So now let's look at what else you have. It's a government bond. So you don't have to create a whole new agency and everything. It's just a government bond. You already know how to issue government. All machinery to issue government bonds is already here. You're just issuing a different kind. So that's another plus for it. You don't have to build anything new in that direction to do it. What about supporting the long-term and domestic holdings of the debt? Everybody understands that for a given debt to GDP or whatever you're measuring, even if it's large, if a big part of the debt of a country is held domestically, that's viewed by everyone, including foreigners who are investing in not these bonds, but are investing in your other bonds. They're going to be much more secure knowing that the people who live here are holding this debt, and they're going to think long and hard before they default on it. It's much more strong support. And what is it? This is long-term debt. Notice there are no payments on it, depending on the ages and when you're going to retire, but for decades in some cases. I mean, that's something that's got to be very supportive. And by the way, if you're a policymaker and you have ripples that every country has, it's a lot more flexibility if you don't have to worry about how to cover it all. Next thing I want to mention is infrastructure. Financing infrastructure. I know my country needs a lot of it. I suspect you could use some. Okay? What's the nature of infrastructure? All payments out for years. You're building airports, you're building roads, right? Lots and lots of payments out, nothing in. And then, later on, the in comes in. The airports start producing it, the roads start producing it, the computer systems, whatever you put in, start to pay off. Now, not here so much, no, not here. At least I don't think so. You know yourself better than I do, so. But in some countries, they're lucky if they can borrow on 5-year bonds. Maybe it can get to 10, but that's a tough thing. So what do they have to do infrastructure? First of all, they have to borrow 5 years to build something that's going to take them 10 years to build. Next, because they're coupon bonds, they have to pay the interest every 6 months during all that time when they have no revenue. So they have to borrow money for them to give them back their money. That's a drag. And what happens if 5 years out, the markets get a little funny and you can't refi it, go over the debt at any kind of reasonable price? You end up with half an airport. So this fits very well into infrastructure. And the reason I'm going through these with you, and I apologize I've taken so much of your time tonight, But I wanted you to hear the story of how to think about this. It's not one thing. It's looking at the whole, how it can come together. And finally, I'll just mention is if you're a country, not mine, but your country has a VAT, right?
Yeah.
What is that tax called? It's called a consumption tax, because in the end, so your revenues are consumption. And what do you have to pay on these bonds? Consumption. It's a nice hedge. It's a better hedge than having it in your own currency. Because your revenues are not driven by the currency. It's driven by this. And by the way, no one else has that. So it's very natural to have the government issue it because it has a natural hedge that's substantial. So those are all the reasons. So that's what it's all about. And then as you walk out the door, okay, I gave here that this is the potential to implement RSB. As I mentioned, it's an enhancement. I think your system that you have, the outflow, is ideal for this. And one of the reasons is, if no one else bought it, you know, all that list I gave you, if the outflow use them, it'll be a big chunk to make it a good market. So you can start it out here in ways that a country that has Social Security primarily can't really do. And I'll give you others here, but I think you can see, I think we've studied, my partner and I, we've been working in RSB, we studied 72 countries. Let's look for who looks good. I have to say, I'm happy to say from my point of view, Mexico looks good to use this. Not that it will, but you have a lot that makes it something you can do. Finally, and this is the true finally, has it ever been done? The answer is yes. Brazil, in January of 2023, that's 2 years ago, Treasury decided on its own. I don't want to say this is something that came in there and I advised them, right? They heard about it, you know, they read the papers and they had a few questions. But they decided this is something they wanted, the Treasury wanted. And they did it. Now, as you know, when you build things, you have version 1.0, version 2.0. Theirs is version 1.0. It's a lot simpler than what I showed you. But that's okay. We're used to building things, and they had good reasons for what they did. Namely, one of the things is they didn't put it in for consumption, they only did it for inflation. Why? Because they have a good linkers market, and they didn't have to mess with anything. Two, they didn't allow institutions to invest, only individuals. Well, that took away a lot of the value, especially here, where the natural buyers would be the outflow, right? Why did they do that? Because they were worried that it might disrupt the market is something new. I hope they're not planning to make this permanent, right? And so it's been running for 2 years, and I'm not going to tell you it's good, doing well or not. You can look it up. It's working. Now, my last thing is on this. They did version 1.0, and I give them a lot of credit. I was delighted. They had a local champion, which was their own treasury, who wanted this and wanted to get it done, and they got it done. I've been pretty pleased with, and I don't want to tell you which country I'm talking about for a minute. You could go to 3.0. You could leapfrog that first one, if you chose to, because you have structure that they didn't have. There's not something wrong with them. I'm just saying you had, in my view, a comparative advantage. So, yes, enormous credit that they've done it. They were good. And you'll see if you look at the data. But by the way, you know what the longest RSB they have? They call Rememez. It's a 2084. Now remember, that's not the maturity date. That's when it starts paying. So this is a bond that won't be paying for 60 years. And then it'll pay for another 20 years. So it'll go into the next century. So this is not a toy in that sense. They really went the whole route. and put it out there. Thank you very much. I apologize to you for taking your time. I warned you a little bit, but you know.
Let's continue.
Thank you. Q&A if you're up for it. By the way, I always do this with my class. I'll turn my back. And anyone who wants to sneak out of the room, you've been a great audience staying this long. Okay? But yes, I'll take Q&A if you want to ask me. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask you, what do you think would be a good measure of risk for a pension fund, a defined contribution pension fund?
Very good.
Compare it to
very good
using
question.
VAR.
Yeah, so very good question. As I mentioned, I think in my early opening when I talked about this, the pillar 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to call you pillar 2. I understand it's not the same thing. That's what I meant by this is not a one design. This is to show you a whole pattern which you can then build to fit what you need. In fact, improve on it. I expect that. I'm not standing here, this is the solution forever. It's to give you a framework of thinking that you can adapt. So let me tell you the number 1 statement. The risk, as I showed you in the very first slide, the risk is not a wealth risk. It's not how much your money values. Nobody looks at their pension. If you marked pensions or annuities to their price, given their duration, which is a technical word meaning that when interest rates change, they change a lot. You'd have one of the most volatile assets out there. Why are people not worried about it? Either the pension fund or the other. Pension funds for other reasons, but not this. It's because they don't care about that. What they care about is that they have that income because that's what they want. And I tried to show you the thought process. We understand how to think in terms of making decisions in income. My 3 PhD nanotechnology MIT colleagues, 150 IQs. If I tell them they have $1 million, that's a lot of money, but they have $1 million in their 401k, which is like the DC. They can't tell you how they're doing toward retirement the way I showed you, and you two gentlemen who I picked were able to figure out what you need, what you want, and you can think about it yourself and without anything else, okay? So what is the real risk? It's your income and retirement is the volatility you care about, not the value of the portfolio. And so if you focus on the value of the portfolio, Treasury bill looks risk-free, right? Doesn't fluctuate. If you look at it in terms of income, it's one of the, probably the riskiest thing on the planet, and it has low returns. Okay? So my answer to you, number 1, we should do that. Now, I just have to mention this because I was so proud of it that I came here in 2019. Consar, I believe, I know, put in a rule that they said you're going to have to express to people who have accounts, not just their account value, but you're going to have to show them how much income they could get in retirement, not based on a wish or a dream, but based on market prices. The same way you wouldn't want them to say, the stocks we bought you think are worth 50% more, so when they send you your account balance, they move it up by 50%. You wouldn't put up with that. So the idea is, you look at market prices, annuities or whatever you want to use, or treasuries, and so forth. You ask, how much income would this accumulation give me in retirement? And that's what you look at the fluctuation in, not the value of the account. Because that's where you want to end up. You all at least seem to agree. That's why I set the goal at the very beginning. You have a goal. The goal is an income goal. The risk is income in retirement, not the value of the account. And it causes so much damage or difficulty because people can't figure out what $1 million means. And they can't because they can't know. It could be, as I mentioned before, $6,000 a year, $50,000 a year. So that's why, I'm sorry to spend the time on it. It's your fault for asking one of those questions if the birdie comes down and says, good question. Okay, another one?
Yes.
There you go. Oh, yes.
I was wondering, this sounds great, but you say Mexico could be version 3.0, but how? I mean, this is issued by the government, but here we are banks, common people that maybe we have some financial knowledge, but there is a lot of people that don't have that knowledge. So how can we convince the government, or because we are worried about people in informal economy, people that
Well,
work cleaning houses that they do not have.
Yes, absolutely.
And how
They're not the ones that have to convince the government. That's my first point. You know, if I'm a doctor, that's one thing. If I know nothing about medicine, are you going to make, well, I should say this because of my country, but would you make the head of the health department for the country somebody that doesn't know anything about medicine? I don't even, you know, look, I'm not a politician, and I didn't mean that as a political statement, although it sort of sounds that way. But what I'm saying is, you want to convince the people in this audience, okay, because it's good for the country. It isn't just you're doing nice things, which you are. You're improving your country. You're making it stronger. You're making a possibility of improving GDP. Everybody gains from that, okay? And I tried to show you that everybody could use this bond, from the wealthy to those who are marginal. And I spent a lot of your time and mine trying to show you by example of the features in this, and going through these two gentlemen helped me out, to show you how, what they need to make, those people you're talking about Antonio, need a decision to make a good decision for themselves. They have to know when they're going to retire or have a number for it. And they have to know how they're living now. And believe me, I'm sure, because they're adults looking after themselves, they understand when they get their money, how to decide whether to spend it on this or that. And I want to have it that you have, you know, when they think of their budget, I don't mean they have a real budget. I mean, they're thinking about, do I buy this? Do I fix the garage? Do I take a little trip? Do I go out to eat? You know, all those things that we all, and everybody has to do. I want them to think about, you know, I helped my neighbor paint their garage this weekend, and they gave me this money. What am I going to do with it? And then you say, well, you know, one of the things I could do is I could put it in my retirement account. And, you know, they understand what that means. They don't understand when they put money in a retirement account now, because all they know is they put the money in and they're going to get something later. When they buy the bonds, if you look the way I presented to you, they know exactly what they're going to get. And it's in terms of today, understanding, not projecting what they'll need 30 years from now. I'm repeating because I wanted you to hear, that's what I was trying to message to get to you. It's entirely designed for the people you did, but it works for everyone. Okay, so that's my answer to you. And I also wanted to underscore, it really doesn't want to get rid of guaranteed pensions, Social Securities, whatever version you have. Okay, and it's not trying to get, you know, undercut the private sector outflows. It's going to enhance them. And that's really important. So I'd like to think, if they understood it, they'd say, this is a good idea. We can do what we do better for the people and still make a good living. And, I mean, in other words, we're not taking away those people. It's designed for people. All these things I'm trying to show you is something for everybody in here. Get stability. You know, you have people in the government whose job it is to say, safety and soundness of the government bond market in Mexico. And that's all they think about, and that's fine. I've showed you how this could be very stabilizing for them. There's something for everybody in it, and it's real. It's not something that was ginned up. It came out of the design that we did. We were just trying to ask what would be a good design to solve this problem. So thank you for your question. What is it? Any others?